Hey there, everyone. We are halfway through the conference. Can you believe it? I can't believe that it's already the end of day 3 of the Wild Wonder Nature Journaling Conference 2024. So I'm going to do my full day summary in case you missed anything, in case you're wondering what supplies you need when you take the video version, in case you just kind of want to know what happened in a quick summary. So we started off with the poem in the morning. Every time I draw John Muir Laws, it comes out a little bit different. He was wearing his Mountain Lion t-shirt from last year's conference, and he had this funny quote that I wanted to put on here, which is, "A human being is not a sitting animal." And so I thought that was really funny. And then we did a little breathing exercise, which was great. And the poem was Joy in Life by Thich Nhat Hanh. And I'll just read you a little quote from that poem. "You must be completely awake in the present to enjoy the tea. If you are not present, you will look around and life will be gone. You will look down into the cup and it will be gone. Worrying is worthless." So that was a really great poem to start off the day, just to think about being present. And that was the challenge for today, was to be present. So if you're doing those daily challenges, that's what that was. And then our first class was with Sophia Gazarian. You probably already saw the interview. Hopefully you saw the interview that I did with her a couple weeks ago. I interviewed most of the teachers and speakers at the conference before the show so that you would get a chance to see like what their teaching style is like and learn a little bit more about their class and what materials you would require. So if you saw that interview with her, you already knew what you're going to need for the class. It was really interesting. Despite having researched her and interviewed her, there were still things in the class that I wasn't expecting. The style for painting birds was very different from how I do quick drawings of birds. So a lot of times, even if you notice, oh, this isn't the way I do it, this doesn't feel like comfortable or doesn't feel like the way I like, sometimes just practicing someone else's technique can actually be really useful. If you're a brand new beginner, you don't have that problem. You can just try a bunch of different things. She uses water brushes all the time, even at home. She said, if you're starting out with water brushes and you're feeling frustrated or struggling, keep trying, because she said at first she was like that and she practiced with water brushes more, and now she uses them even when she's at home. She also starts with the texture. And she said you don't need special supplies. She was using really basic watercolors, so you don't need fancy watercolors or fancy paper. She also said throw away your pencil and draw straight with pen. And she recommended that the official slogan for the Wild Wonder Nature Journaling Conference should be, "It's okay." Here you can see the birds that I drew during her class and some of my notes. Let's see what else she recommended. Smaller drawings, thicker pens. She starts her watercolor with the darkest color first, which is really interesting. And she uses short strokes. So it was a good class. You don't really need any special materials as long as you have watercolor, any watercolor set, and a pen for drawing, like a fine liner micron type pen. So great class and a very interesting style. People love her Instagram post. People love her bird painting. So this is a great class to learn how she actually makes it, because I couldn't really figure it out from just looking at her Instagram. Then the next class was with Meryl Jamila. She is from the Netherlands and does these, she's famous for her gouache paintings. So it was cool to have someone teaching about gouache at this year's conference. Usually there's like one class a year about gouache. I buy a bunch of gouache supplies for that class, think that it's really cool, and I wish I could practice it more. And then those gouache supplies sit in my art supply box until next year. So I got to take my gouache out again for the first time in a year and use them for her class. It was a really good class. I felt like she explained things very well, and she was doing a paint along the whole time. Her process is time consuming, so she didn't fit the whole painting in, but you can take the class and work at your own speed and make sure you have the references and stuff like that. She also explained a lot about her supplies, which I thought was really interesting. And I'm hopefully going to do a supplies video at the end of the conference and summarize all the supplies from the entire conference. That's a lot of work, so we'll see if I get around to it. But she had some really good tips about supplies. Also, she pointed out that she's a little bit messy. She lets things get a little bit messy. For example, she doesn't clean her brush. She lets her palette get really messy, and all of the colors that way are related, are all sort of mixed a little bit with each other so that there's cohesion in the landscape. What else was a really good tip here? Don't clean your brush too much, and you need a lot of white. So then I did this other one for during her class, which was just like on a separate piece of paper. And you can see I'm using some of the scrapbooking techniques a lot, like ripping out separate paper. I did this on Arch's watercolor paper because I wanted to do my gouache painting on a little bit more textured of a surface. She doesn't use that. She uses Stillman and Byrne Delta series. She uses ivory tone paper, which is very interesting. I've only used Delta series a few times, but now I went to white because I usually do watercolor, and having straight white paper helps for that. Then, also with gouache, you have to work from dark to light. If you're working from light to dark, it's really hard. One thing I'd also recommend about this class is if you want to experiment with gouache and just see what that material is like, this is a good class for you. Also, if you don't like gouache or you find it challenging, this is probably a good class for you also, because you're going to learn things and practice things. And like I said in my Instagram that I did earlier today, sometimes you can just get a lesson from trying that material. Without trying gouache, you won't learn that lesson. Without trying charcoal, you'll never learn those lessons that only charcoal drawing can teach you. So that in itself, to me, is a good enough reason to do something like this. Sometimes people during these classes are like, how am I going to use this in the field? Blah, blah, blah. That's a good question, totally valid question. I'm personally very interested in how we can use these techniques like in the field and challenging situations with fast moving animals. But remember, sometimes just practicing these things at home, it's training your brain to think about these things, and maybe it'll be the thing that unlocks your ability to simplify these and draw them faster when you're in the field, because gouache taught you how to see value in a different way. That would be a good enough reason, in my opinion, to practice with gouache and learn what gouache has to teach you. Then it was Pencil Miles and Chill. I facilitated a session on language, diversity, and nature journaling. It was an interesting session. People had some interesting experiences about nature journaling and the diversity or lack of linguistic diversity in the nature journaling community, what it means to nature journal in other languages, things like that. And then goes straight on to another class that had materials that you needed to have the specific materials. For the gouache class, you definitely need to get specific materials. Having a big mixing area is going to help a lot. You don't need to have her specific types of paint, but make sure you have a lot of white. Make sure you have yellow ochre. Make sure you have at least one blue, a couple blues. Burnt umber would be a good color to have. At least one green. I think I used, I don't remember the name of the green, but I used one green and then I mixed it with different blues and yellows to make other greens. So those are some of the things you're going to need for that class. A variety of brushes, large brushes, a big mixing area, like I said, is really important. But she has a supply list PDF attached to her class on Sked. So the next class was with Maggie Hurley. If you make a mistake, so what? That was a good quote from her, and it was a charcoal class. So we started with vine charcoal. So you need at least vine charcoal. That's all I had. That was the only material I got for this, and I got some used, so that was good. Vine charcoal, and you probably already have the pencils needed. And speaking of needed, you need a kneaded eraser and maybe a couple other types of erasers and a piece of Kleenex, and you should be good for that class. So also another class where it's all about, in my opinion, it's all about what are the lessons that that particular medium can teach you. Does it teach you more about values? Does it show you that you really like being able to add highlights at the end? What can you learn from charcoal? even if you can't use this in the field, and I've used this in nature journaling in museums before, and if you bring a couple paper towels, you bring some paper like this to protect it from smearing, it's possible to do charcoal in the field. It's not that crazy. It's not that messy. It doesn't have to be super messy. Like I didn't, my table was not that messy at the end of her class. It is possible to do it. And then we went straight into Brooke Morales's class, which also is going to require you to get specific material. And in this case, I found that I would have done better, I think, in her class if I had the exact same watercolor pigments that she was using. I didn't, but I did have the right paper. So that made a big difference. This was the one sort of simulating her technique. I just ate half a pint of ice cream, so to stay awake for this. So I'm getting a little bit of gas, I think. And then I did a couple more experiments here. So I like to just try to do a lot of experiments. I took a lot of notes on materials because she had a lot of tips in her class about materials that you can't find on Shed or on the PDF. She talks about them a lot on her Instagram, but you'd have to search through her Instagram to find a lot of them. So in this class, she did talk quite a bit about it, and she had some really good tips too. So I highly recommend at least watching that part of it on the video version. And she talked about how time is our most precious resource. So speed is actually very helpful. Being able to paint anything quickly is very important. This was an amazing pro tip about water brushes. I feel like I could probably teach a master class on using water brushes. I've used them so much, but this was something that I hadn't, I haven't used before. So that was really cool. That if your water brush is flowing too quickly, or you just want to do a moment where you have more control of it, you can just unscrew the reservoir and paint it like this without the reservoir attached. Speaking of not having enough control over it and having it come out too much, I was trying to do these tests to see how my different yellows and blues mixed, because unfortunately it seems like in my watercolor palette, all of the yellows create green when they're mixed with blue. So that's unfortunate for this technique. She says that quinacridone burnt gold doesn't turn green, so that's the one she uses when she has, or yellow ochre, maybe it was yellow ochre, doesn't turn green. So I might need to look into that. If any of you have John Muir Law's watercolor palette and know which of the yellows doesn't turn green when mixed with blue, let me know. Next class, last class from the day, was the poetry class, writing nature poetry with Amy Nezukumatato, and it was really cool. Been waiting to do her class for a while because she wasn't able to make it last year. Here's some of my notes. My drawing of her, my drawings of people's faces didn't come out that great today, but I tried. And she was talking about not your grandpa's nature poetry, which I thought was cool. And we talked about different phobias, and then we had to write a poem about a specific phobia. I started off doing not understanding the instructions. And so I started writing something that wasn't a poem. I thought we were just kind of doing like these writing prompts, and then we are going to build a poem from it later. Then I realized what I was doing wrong partway through. And instead of freaking out or giving up or ranting in the chat, I just grabbed this scrap piece of paper, attached it in here, and did my poem really quickly on there. So try not to get too precious about it. And then once again, comics have been sneaking into the conference. We have in the past had conferences, Wild Wonder conferences, where there was a lot of classes about comics, keynote speakers about comics, and lots of classes about comics. This year, technically, there weren't any classes about that were supposedly about comics. Rosemary Moscow talked about comics because she does comics a lot. But guess what? In the poetry class, the final assignment was basically to make a comic, and we folded a zine. So if you're familiar with zines, this would be very familiar. And we turned the poem into an 8-page zine, which was really cool. Mine is called When I Was an Arpy Eagle. And I actually finished my comic in the time allotted, which is kind of amazing. The first Wild Wonder, there was an assignment with the zine, and I got my first page started, and that was it, and I never finished it, and that was 6 years ago. And then I just had some leftover stuff from Seffi George's class the other day, some printouts, and I just glued those into here on this extra page that I had. Look how many scrapbooking techniques I'm using in my nature journal this year. It's really helping for me for note taking and stuff. See, like I can cut out the printed out schedule. Having a printer is an amazing art tool as well. I'm learning this year, like just being able to print stuff out, cut it, and then put it into your journal. It gives you a lot of options. So then I got to try to draw Amy's face again during her keynote, because she taught a class this year and then she gave the keynote. And it was pretty cool. It was interesting to hear that she didn't even know what a poem was when she first ran into one. And that poem actually changed her life. She dropped out of medical school and pursued poetry, started taking a bunch of poetry classes and everything like that. So it was really interesting to hear about her life story. And she talked about curiosity, how to start poetry, how to look into things. What do you love? What do you fear? What do you wonder about? And then all about the importance of wonder, which obviously connects really well to this conference. She liked Mary Oliver, talked about Mary Oliver. You know, Mary Oliver is one of the most quoted poets in the nature journaling community. She had a lot of interesting stuff that came up in her conversation, including like some political stuff. The fact that nature spaces in North America don't always feel accessible to all people. They're not necessarily safe spaces for all people, especially when she was younger. She didn't see people of color out in nature very much, so she didn't feel safe there. So I think that's really important that those conversations come up during the conference, and that's one of the things that we talked about. Then I actually even made it to the backstage pass for a little bit. And I even did some notes in there. One person named Rosa said that curiosity dispels despair. And that was a really cool quote. And there was some conversation about questions versus answers. And then I just practiced just to help me keep awake. I was eating ice cream while I was doing this to try to stay awake, but I did these quick people drawing some of the other people in the Zoom. Hi, Crystal. Thanks for joining in. I see you bought your ticket. That's cool. Yes, I understand about the size. I have tried the smaller one than this, and most of the and what the first time I tried the smaller one, like just a little bit smaller, it felt like it was cramping some of my drawing and nature journaling. So that's why I like this one. There's definitely times when I use small ones, but I also like to cut out the small ones and then paste them into here. It definitely gives you more options for that type of stuff, which is very helpful. Like this page, these pages would have been a lot harder to do with the smaller sketchbook. So yeah, so that's a good point. And I think that's all I have for today. If you want to stay tuned to all of my little posts during the day, and little tips, and share my pages during the day, then check out my Instagram. It's at Marley Pfeiffer on Instagram. And if you want to get more behind the scenes information, and if you want to support the Nature Journal Show and the work that I do, you should check out my Patreon here. It's just patreon.com/Marley Pfeiffer. During the year, I post exclusive content, and I have tons of posts on there that if you sign up, you'd be able to get access to. I do monthly study sessions, exclusive videos, and we're going to start up the traveling journal on there again soon. So check it out. If you are getting value from these crazy marathon days that I'm doing and the summaries I'm doing at the end of each day, consider supporting the show that way. Also on YouTube, in the little chat area, where is it? It should be over here in the little chat area. You can actually do a super thanks and like send me $1 or something like that. Because just so you know, it's really hard to make these videos at the end of the day. I'm not, this is like my main work and everything like that because I believe in it. So far, it doesn't really pay the bills. Part of that is why I'm currently homeless. So I have a place to sleep, but I'm basically spending all my time here at this co-working place so I can do videos and create content and stuff like that. Um, and anyways, just a little, just I usually don't talk about that stuff, but if you support me on Patreon, I'll super appreciate it. Or here on YouTube, even just liking it or anything like that. I usually don't plug myself or anything like that, but it is important and I appreciate it because it's hard work that's going into making these. All right, everybody, thanks for your support and everything, and keep up the good work. If you can't make to the conference, that's fine. If you can get value out of these videos, that's great. The most important thing is just to keep nature journaling, keep making art, and keep observing nature.